things that's kind of really important, I think, in my role is that I look at all of the issues that women are facing from the contacts that we have, either through the telephone or the information centre, and look at what the kind of key issues are that women talk about, and then look at the broader political agenda, both state and federal. If a woman's going to a girl's going to get an education and training, ultimately that's to lead to paid work. If she's going to go into paid work, she's also likely to be having a family and to be having children. If she's doing that, then she can't go into paid work without a better system than what we've currently got to actually support her in that working environment. So what I was actually doing was saying the paid maternity leave debate is great, and yes, but that's 14 weeks or at this particular point, but it takes 18 years to raise a child, so let's not forget about the other 17 point whatever months that it actually takes to raise a child. So that's kind of an example of how a call that we might get about a woman trying to get work or struggling to find childcare when she's trying to balance her paid work is then taken, and then, you know, in this instance we'll go to Julia Gillard, to Tanya Plibersek and to Maxine McHugh to say, if you're really serious about these issues, we want these put on the agenda as a hot topic. Now, it might take 10 years to bring about some sort of change with that system, but it's a bit like probably what you've heard from some of the other women. It's how you actually bring about structural change.
The girls asked 3 of the founders about their early lives and how they see Wire and women today.
What was it like growing up in the 1930s and 40s compared with your vision of what it is today?
Well, first of all, I grew up on a farm in the Yarra Valley. I only had brothers and boy cousins, and I started school the year the Second World War started in 1939. I came from a background, if you like, of community service. It was just something that you did automatically. I guess the first time I became aware that girls were not allowed to do some things that boys were was when I went to secondary school, which was a higher elementary school at Lilydale. Because I only had brothers, I used to play footy and cricket with the boys all the time. When I got to higher elementary school, I went out into the yard to play footy with the boys and got called before the head teacher, because girls weren't allowed to play football with the boys. There was a boys' yard and a girls' yard, and the girls weren't allowed to go into the boys' yard. So I guess that was my first experience of there being differences, if you like, and I didn't think much of that, I have to say.
Were your family and friends supportive of you?
Yes, although my mother always took the view that she thought a parliamentarian's role was a man's role, not a woman's role. But she came from a generation where the women, by and large, stayed at home and reared their families. And she sometimes found it very difficult. She was supportive, but she wasn't a feminist herself in that sort of sense. My father was very supportive. He believed that I should be able to do whatever I wanted to do in terms of being a parliamentarian. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see me become a member of parliament. He lived to see me become councillor, and he was very proud of that.
And has Wire done what you thought it would?
Yes, I guess we didn't have a absolute cut and dry view of what it should be, and I don't think you should, because I think you should be adaptable enough to make sure it meets the needs of the times. The fact that we got it established, I think, was the first great victory, if you like. The fact that it eventuated at all was an achievement for all of the women who were involved in the women's groups who were involved.
Right, so when did you first realise you were a feminist?
I think from a very early age, when my mother set up a
rostered for drying the dishes, and I was on it, my brothers weren't, and I had 5 brothers. So I said, oh, well, what about them? And she said, oh, okay. And so, you know, it was probably 7 or 8 years of age. But just that awareness that I wanted to do things that they did, like play footy and hang about, and I wasn't supposed to because I was a girl. And I felt, looking at the world around me, that there were so many things that women were supposedly not able to do, or by law not allowed to do. And I just thought, this is crazy, it doesn't make any sense. So I had become involved with WIRE as a kind of one of the many things I did around that time of trying to make things different in the world for women particularly.
So do you think WIRE has achieved what you hoped it would?
Oh, I think more so than probably we even dreamed of back then. I mean, in those days there was so little funding of women's services of any kind. So the fight to get that money and to set it up was a long process. But at any point the government could change its mind, withdraw the funding, you know, and the whole thing could just fall apart after all that amount of work. So to see it surviving this many years later is amazing, and not only surviving but in a really healthy way with widespread awareness in the community that it exists, even though they'll keep needing to do that. So it's a really foundational service now. It's a kind of a hub that links women to so many of the other services that are there now that weren't actually in existence back then. So no, I think it's done more than we probably ever dreamed of doing. Yeah.
So do you think there'll ever be a time when, like, women and men are equal?
I hope so. I hope so. I think it's possible, but I think there are always pressures, and so you've got pressures to maintain progress, and you know, and then you've got pressures to wind things back, and it kind of goes like this, and then things around the world change and affect the way those pressures work. So you can say in general things have really changed, but it also has to have meaning for every kind of woman and every kind of man, that notion of equality. So, you know, women with intellectual disabilities and Aboriginal women are still not living anywhere near as long as white women. So is that equality? Things have become more complex because we see gender and we see race and we see disability and we see sexuality. So they're continuing to be things that we need to pay attention to.